Hey everyone, this is a little addendum to our VOC 800 episode. It's been a 007 back with another of the VOC curators. Welcome, Duncan.
Hi everyone, this is Duncan, also known as Valkyrist on the Discord.
Yeah, and Duncan's been with us almost since the very beginning. What was your first episode? Was it The Wire? I'm trying to think back.
No, I think The Wire was my second one. The first one was in the single digits. We did a reread, a Feast Dance reread. And I think I volunteered for the Jon Snow episode because no one else wanted to. But that was my first one in a very cold flat that I lived in Ballarat at the time. I remember getting up at 4 a.m. and putting on my dressing gown and half asleep, but I really enjoyed it. And obviously I came back.
Well, there you go. I mean, that is real dedication to the cause because you are
Oh
in one
yeah.
of the
Oh yeah.
inhospitable time zones as well. But I
Yes.
guess that
Yes.
must be, 10 years ago or something? I mean, it feels like a while, right, since we kicked
Yeah,
off this.
more. 2013, I guess it'd be late 2013.
Gosh. And so along this journey, I mean, I think it's fair to say you're one of the more articulate and thoughtful voices in the VOC
Uh,
community.
it's been
Probably
alleged.
because
Unproven though. Unsupported by evidence.
well, I think it probably helps to tell the listeners a little bit about what you studied, like your doctorate, and sort of because you come to it with a kind of literary theory, or maybe a more of a literary framework than many of us approaching the material.
Yeah, well, back when I started the podcast, I had no idea what I was doing. I was doing a Bachelor of Arts at university, you know, trying out this subject and trying out that subject and feeling a bit lost. But at the end of the degree, I was asked to create like a thesis, like a 5,000 word research project on any topic I wanted, which is the first time that had happened. And I was, 2 years into my A Song of Ice and Fire obsession, and I had no one to talk about it with, and I had not really found any kind of literary scholarship on the topic. So I decided to do a kind of philosophical approach to the series. And I wrote a thesis and I loved it. And that's kind of what inspired me to continue into academia and teaching at universities. So I went on to do an honors thesis and then a PhD in found footage horror films. But all along the way, I maintained my love and my obsession with A Song of Ice and Fire and continued to just, write essays for fun. So the original thesis was for university, and it was looking at meta narratives, which is a concept put forth by a postmodern philosopher, Jean-Francois Lyotard, who suggested that the postmodern condition is an incredulity towards meta narratives, and I definitely read that into Martin's works, that he's showing all of these kind of cultural institutions, including the sort of the conventions of the fantasy genre, and he's very skeptical of them. And I think the series is very much a deconstruction of all of these frameworks that we've come to rely on morally, ethically, institutionally, culturally, and the characters go through that journey. So that inspired me to continue writing about the series, and I published essays on various topics with Tower of the Hand over the years, and podcasted a lot, and met up with fans at conventions, and yeah.
Yeah, it's worth saying to listeners who are into A Song of Ice and Fire, but maybe joined in latter years when, after the last book was published. The Tower of the Hand is a really great resource for long form essays. I mean, you've written there. I think a few others in the VOC community have too.
Yeah, Michael Karwadakis, he's published quite a few essays there as well.
Yeah, exactly.
One of our thoughtful podcasters.
Yeah, exactly. Also Australian, maybe there's a link. But we're talking today, we did another episode, which I'll link in the show notes, to your previously published book, which feels like it wasn't long ago. You're doing a book a year at the moment.
No, it
on
was a happy coincidence. I mean, these were my twin obsessions: found footage horror films and A Song of Ice and Fire over the past decade, or maybe not a decade, but quite a while. And they sort of both came to fruition around the same time. So no, I will not be publishing a book a year, but I'm glad.
I think it's amazing.
It feels like a culmination of a few years of work.
Absolutely. Well, that was a really great episode. And Duncan, which is so amazing, has a book of essays. Is it a book of essays published on A Song of Ice and Fire? And we thought, what better time than VOC 800, one of our centenary episodes, to talk about it? Because I think, in a sense, it's almost like without I don't know if we can claim anything of it in the VOC community, but it kind of feels like one of our own has been published on A Song of Ice and Fire. It's a really big moment, like for all the kind of dick jokes and silliness of the community, that it has on occasion been a thoughtful place for discussions and testing out ideas. And I think we're all just so incredibly proud of you, Duncan, for like getting a book out
Oh.
of thoughtful Song of Ice and Fire stuff. So do you want to tell us a little bit about the format, where it's published, where people can find it? And obviously I'll put all the links in the show notes for the episode. But yeah, just talk us through when it was published, how we can get it, and what it's about.
Well, that's very kind of you, Bina. Thank you. I appreciate those words. It is, the full title of the book is Notes from the Citadel, and the subtitle is The Philosophy and Psychology of A Song of Ice and Fire. It is available on Amazon in ebook. You can also order the paperback on ebook, and you can also order the paperback on the Barnes and Noble website. So
Actually, you should probably tell people your full name, like your author name, as opposed to just Duncan and Valgarist, right? So
Oh yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, good tips for publishing authors to actually give their name. My full name is Duncan Hubber, spelled Hubber. So if you search Hubber in Amazon or Barnes and Nobles, my book should pop up. And what was your second question? Sorry, I forgot.
Yeah, just to tell us a little bit about the format. But before we get to that, it's probably worth pointing out to people that not only can you potentially choose to buy it for yourself, but you can also choose to request a copy for your local library, which is another lovely way of supporting the book, not being out of pocket yourself, and just making it available to wider readers. So that's another, I know some of the VOC community have done that, and that's another lovely way to support the project. But yeah, tell us a bit about the format. So what are the themes of the essays? How is it structured?
So it's a collection of 11 essays dealing in philosophy and psychology in various ways. Some of the essays were inspired by episodes of the podcast that we recorded. I remember when we were doing our full linear reread of the series, I came on for Bran Stark's last chapter when he's getting his teachings from the Three-Eyed Crow. And I thought the chapter and Martin sort of put forth this interesting perspective on how we perceive time, or rather how the Three-Eyed Crow presents time to the reader, not as a linear thing, but as a kind of eternal or predetermined thing. And so I explored that idea in relation to the philosophy of eternalism, use that as a lens to examine other aspects of the book, particularly prophecies, whether prophecies can exist in a world, whether free will can exist in a world where prophecies exist and are seen to come true, or whether everything is predetermined and we're just kind of like going through the motions of a world that has no past, present, or future. Everything's already fixed in place. We only perceive it as linear. Another episode was a panel discussion that I actually did with Michael Kalwadegi at the Melbourne Thrones Con, and that was looking at conspiracy theories. So the beloved practice of theory crafting in the A Song of Ice and Fire fandom. So I wrote that inspired another essay on the idea of conspiracy theories in the books, the fact that we often have very limited knowledge and that our knowledge is constantly being tested and questioned throughout the series, and both the characters and the reader. Martin culminates this sort of paranoid skepticism and suspicion in us that we're always questioning everything on the surface. We're always trying to get to a deeper level, and that can sometimes be fruitful and productive, and sometimes can go into very strange and bizarre places if you've read some of the wackier theories in the fandom, but always very fun.
I feel like strange and bizarre places could be like the subtitle of Rock. That's
absolutely.
Is, isn't it? Strange
and one of the arguments I put forth is this is the result or the consequence of having this obsessed, devoted fan base leaving their beloved series on a cliffhanger and then not publishing anything to sort of resolve that tension. So we have no new books to read, so we just create new stories out of the stories that we have. So that's where fan fiction comes from. That's where theory crafting comes from. So there's lots of different essays. I'm really proud of them. I think they add a new insight to the books and the characters and Martin's writing. I look at psychology a lot as well. I do a really in-depth psychological study of Arya Stark as this
Ooh. And what's your
person
conclusion?
that is.
Is you know that
Well,
I have.
my
I'm unusual in the
yep.
fandom that I never liked her, and I think she's got
Yeah.
she's got to go. To me, she's like dragons. Like she's become something so a bit like Tyrion is, I guess, by the end. Like there's something. I think people think of her as this like spunky, perky little girl, and they don't
Mhm.
really acknowledge what she's becoming. So, what's your theory on Arya?
Well, I'm different to you in the sense that I love her. She's probably my favorite character, and that's why I wanted to write about her. But I absolutely acknowledge in the essay the very disturbing things she does. I don't love her because she's necessarily a good person, although I think she might be able to redeem herself. But I think psychologically she's fascinating, and she's kind of like that's where my heart broke the most, seeing her journey from this really wide-eyed, spunky, tween, and becoming just kind of destroyed and corrupted, and having her heart broken by the world. And I look at it as a process of depersonalization, which is a process where if you undergo a traumatic event, sometimes you become sort of detached from reality, or you see yourself outside your own body. And I think Martin explores that idea both through his narration and his examination of Arya's point of view, but also her skin changing abilities. The fact that she is constantly sort of skin changing into different animals and also trying on different faces. So it's a sort of, I say it's sort of a metaphor for this idea of becoming detached from the person you are because it's so painful. So you almost deny your own personhood and try to become something different. And I sort of speculate where that might lead her and what the function of the Faceless Men organization is and things like that. I also look at my least favorite or my most hated characters, which are the Ironborn. I really struggled with those characters throughout the series, particularly A Feast for Crows. But the more I thought about them, the more interesting I found them as a kind of culture dealing with a traumatic event that they have never really been able to get past, which is the loss of the old way. And the fact that they have this deep and destructive nostalgia, what's called a restorative nostalgia, where they're constantly trying to return to this golden age that may or may not have ever existed. And because of that constant looking to the past and this attempt to recreate the past or restore the lost home, as some psychologists have put it, they can never really, it's a self-destructive process. They can never really get past that and create a future, a sustainable future for themselves.
There's an interesting crossover essay between the Ironborn and the Mandalore and the Way.
Right, yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah. And historically, you see that in many different countries, the American South, the idea of the lost
Lost
cause.
cause. Yeah, I was just thinking that.
Yeah, the stabbed in the back theory in Germany and all those kinds of destructive, toxic nostalgic philosophies. Martin is very much a student of history, so he draws a lot upon medieval and modern history in his and colonial history in his view of the world.
Absolutely. So a couple of questions follow up. Can you enjoy and read this book if you didn't watch the show? Because I think it's now becoming a very minority part of our community, but there are some people who still haven't watched the show. So are there essays, or is it like labeled that you can, or does it just assume that you will know the show and the book when you're reading?
No. The majority of essays, 9 of the 11 essays, are only dealing with the books.
Great.
One essay is examining the 4th season of the show, which is looking at the theme of slavery in the 4th season. Both slavery as a psychological concept, but also as an institution that characters like Daenerys are trying to sort of combat or reform. And then there is another essay on House of the Dragon, where I look at it's sort of a feminist or a psychological reading where I'm looking at the Madonna-whore complex, both as a psychological concept, but also a sociological concept in that series. And the fact that it's a series about, 2 women who have very different perceptions and very different identities in Westerosi society. And the Greens and the Blacks very much fall along gendered lines or sort of patriarchal norms about the Madonna and the whore complex. So those are the only two essays that deal with the TV series. The rest are all book focused.
And my second question is, if you're reading it and you're a layperson, as I am, and you don't have formal, like you've never studied psychology and philosophy, is it going to be easy to follow? Is there terminology that's more kind of academic, or is it designed for the general but smart general reader?
No, I wouldn't call it an academic tech. It's sort of academic light. So I introduce some academic terms, but I explain them and I use the series to help the reader understand them better. So it's a way to sort of be introduced to certain psychology or philosophical terms, but they're easy to understand because I put them in A Song of Ice and Fire terms.
What is, because I mean, so much has been written and said and dissected, as you say, in the absence of a new book on A Song of Ice and Fire. Maybe a good sort of closing question is, what's the idea or the insight or the theory that you have that you're, not necessarily that you're the most proud of, but you think that's the most thought-provoking and new? Like, what is the one thing that you think actually people will not have looked at it this in this way before? Actually, I mean, I have to say, what I love about George's writing and all great writers is you can always find new things. They're so rich, they're so deep, they're so slippery in some ways. But what's the thing that you think is the most new for people to read about? Or maybe you've already covered one of your comments.
Possibly. I write an essay about the others, which is obviously a big part of the books. It's often they're often regarded as the ultimate villain of the series, but I don't think they've ever really been examined as anything but this kind of boogeymen, boogie people that occasionally rear their heads, but never played that big of a role in the series. But I thought the idea of the sort of philosophical notion of the others as this kind of this sort of opposite or opposing force to society. We read the other into our enemies as, embodying all of the things that we aren't, all of the things that oppose us, all of the desires that are, disgusting or repellent to us. So I do a sort of in-depth reading of those characters, which I think is quite interesting and I think brought some things out of the text that I didn't really know until I started to think about it. So I'd recommend that essay in particular. I think I'm pretty proud of that one. But I think, each essay has something for everyone. I think there'll be one, thing you hadn't thought about or one aspect of a character you hadn't considered. And I think Martin does a good job at joining everything together. What one character is going through, is reflected and parallel to what other characters are going through. And there's themes that run through his whole book.
Well, it sounds intriguing. I can't wait to read it. And maybe we'll get some discussion pods going on the Discord, and maybe we'll have a few episodes out in due course when people have had a chance to look through and discuss. Because it's not like we got anything else to read in the meantime.
No.
Maybe I'll close it out by kind of linking this back to the main body of the podcast, which was a little bit sillier, and talking about, if there's one character, one plot line, one place that you have a theory about how it's going to finish in the books, what is your either a crackpot theory or a serious thing? I mean, maybe given what you said earlier, the answer is, how do you think Arya's storyline's going to end up and the Faceless Men's impact on the books? Ooh. In a hypothetical future where we get them all. But you can pick something else. It can be something completely silly or, minor.
Yeah. Well, I have written extensive fan fiction back in the day on Arya Stark and Jon Snow. Very long time ago, probably before I even started the podcast.
Oh my goodness.
So I'm sure you can find those in some dark, danky precinct of the internet, and see what my either, theory or fantasy is for what those characters will turn out. But I think seriously, I think I like the idea of Arya, reuniting with Sansa in some way. It's hard for me to think that the Faceless Men are going to tolerate, her behavior enough to send her on a serious mission. But if she does get sent on a serious mission, I like the idea of her being contracted by Littlefinger to, take someone out of the area, and that might bring those two characters back together. Or if we think about the mission of the Faceless Men as trying to bring down the dragons or destroy the Valyrian dynasty, she might be sent to deal with to Daenerys and her dragons. But I don't know. It's hard. I have vague theories, but it's really hard for me to imagine how it all comes together because there's so many spinning wheels. Phagon and the Dornish and I can't even imagine what the Ironborn and Euron are up to. You know,
The world
he's
is too rich.
threatening
This
sort
is
of
why
a
George is
god.
suffering. You know,
Yeah,
I mean,
there's just so much going on. I really can't, and maybe George is struggling to imagine the ending. So I don't know.
yeah, I agree. I think that is what's going on with George. I think it's just he's created such a beautifully rich world. It's almost too rich to bring it back together. And it was really funny. Like I recently did a very speed rewatch of Game of Thrones, and obviously, like everyone else, I had some frustrations with the latter seasons. But it
Mm.
is hilarious how when you get into like season 6, 7, they're just like killing characters off with gay abandon because they just need to prune it down to set
Yeah,
themselves
yeah,
up for 8. And I have to say, I
yeah.
also think that when you watch it at speed and maybe away from the hysteria of the initial watch, you do see some of the arcs they're creating, which I think when you get into the minutiae of, pulling it all apart, get a little bit lost. And I mean, I'm not saying I agree with all their choices at all, but I saw maybe more of the logic, more of the kind of what they were trying to go for, if not succeeding. So I had and maybe it was a nostalgia watch. I felt very benevolent towards it by the end. But actually, what the
Mm,
reuniting of Arya and Sansa and Nate was a very moving moment and really lovely. I'm looking forward to that
mm.
if we ever get a book.
Oh yeah, and some, my favorite episode of the series is still from, quite late, which is the Hard Home episode, which is something
Yes.
that was not in the books, but I thought was amazing in the show. So I'm really grateful for that. And even the
Mm.
really late seasons, like I was pretty disappointed with the execution and the writing, but the actual broad strokes of what happens were quite exciting. Just makes me, excited or hopeful or, sad maybe that about whether George will actually get to give us his version of some
Tell
of
his
those
own
events.
story. Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. But in the meantime, it's lovely to have. I mean, VOC 800, our centenaries, we always try and get back to our Song of Ice and Fire rates, even if there's not been much activity in the intervening 100 episodes.
Mm,
And it has been fun on this episode just to get back to a little bit of the crack pottery. And
mm.
it's amazing that your book is out. I really feel so proud of it, which is so weird because it's not a book I've written or
Oh,
contributed to in
that's
any
very
way.
sweet.
But I
And
do.
hey, hey,
It feels like the community's all grows up. Like something amazing out of all this discussion, something concrete and real came out of
yeah,
it, which is this amazing
yeah.
book. So
Oh,
yeah,
it's an amazing community, and I'm very proud of our podcast. I'm very proud that it's managed to get to 800 episodes and is still going.
it's kind
And
of
hey,
nuts, isn't it?
we've got House of the Dragon in June. I think that'll be fun.
Exactly.
And
Exactly. I
I
think it
think
will be fun.
yeah, there's things to look forward to.
Exactly. Well, on that positive and happy note, thank you so much for jumping on, Duncan, and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you very much, Bina. I appreciate it. See you later.
No problem. Bye.
Happy 800.